Well, I'm excited to be joined today by Joe and Charlie from Jebran and Abraham. Guys, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
Good to see you, Rob.
Yeah, so we started our journey together late September 2020. We are recording this now in June 2022, so that's about 20 months or so. Give us a sense of back then. What did the firm look like? Size, shape, behavior? What did it look like back then?
Yeah, no, essentially back then we were, Joe was not a partner at that time. Actually, maybe he was. I think he had just come on.
Yeah.
And we were doing about, I think 1.8, 1.9 million at that particular junction. We probably had about 9 full-time equivalents. And we just really had the process of trying to grow and figure out what we wanted to do to achieve goals. The goals that we had set in the pamphlet that we filled out were basically a better, partner life, better, life for our team, and just a better firm in general. With the size of what we were doing, we were growing, but we didn't really know why we were growing or how to grow to get that client that would just really make a difference to us and make life easier.
So Charlie, what was the trigger? What was the trigger to say you needed some external help, specifically us, to make whatever changes you wanted?
Actually, it was over probably a 6-month period. I had 2 rather successful clients who both had coaches. And I said, when I was talking to them, I said, you're making $600,000 a year. You're doing pretty well. Life looks great. And you have a coach. He said, yeah, I need somebody to answer to. I said, okay. And I was talking to another one, and she essentially said the same thing. I have, 100 people below me, but nobody above me that I can really feel comfortable with. And somebody has to hold my feet to the fire a little bit. I said, okay, that's good. So one day, I was talking to Joe, and I said, I'm thinking about hiring a coach. And he said, I've thought about the same thing. I said, really? So we did a little bit of research, and he had read one of your books earlier, and a little Google search of things, and your name had come up, as well as a couple others. We actually interviewed one other person, and weren't quite sure what they were more local than you. And at the next stage, Joe and I talked, and then we brought Tom into it. And after our 2 interviews with you, and we decided that you with the experience that you had with working with the other accountants, the case studies that we had looked at, the podcasts. I mean, the list is just too long to go over. You would be a good candidate to assist us in clarifying our journey.
Cool. Well, thank you. It's been a great journey so far, and much more to come. Let's fast forward then. So we were about 1.8, 1.9 with 9 people, 2-partner firm, busy, because when you've got that volume of people on that revenue, it's generally pretty busy if your average hourly rate is not exceptionally high. What does it look like today? Give us some numbers. 20 months later, what's it like?
Joe, you got that right?
So do you want to look at last year, Rob?
Yeah, last year or trailing numbers for this year, what it's going to look like this year?
Okay. So last year.
What are we on track for this year?
So last year we were almost at 2.5 million total revenue last year.
We did a 700 grand jump in year 1. And what does it look like for this year?
This year so far, 5 months, we're at about 1.4. So let me compare that to where we were last year.
And that's to the end of May, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always accrual we go on.
Yeah. Our top line goal this year is, really pie in the sky is probably around that 3.2. So we have a ways to go. Joe, where are we at this point?
So we're at about 1.4 through the 5 months, a 28% increase from the prior year.
And so you should hit 3 by the sound of that. 3.2 might be a stretch, Charlie.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
What
a couple
about-
things, pipeline, we have some things, but you never know.
You've got great revenue growth. What about profitability? How's profitability grown?
We've dropped a lot to the bottom line, but we've also incurred additional expenses that have not come to fruition yet, so to speak. Like the book, I've already paid the $20,000 this year. So that's eating into it. We did hire the CEC, which, now it took us about a year to kind of figure out what her role is. And that's coming along pretty good. But I think our bottom line definitely, how much did that grow over last year? 19 or 20 to 21, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a significant increase.
Cool. What about the headcount? What's the headcount at the moment? How many people do we have total?
Without the partner director, we have 12 full-time equivalents.
So 14 with you two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
15 with
Right.
Tom.
Yeah. 15 with Tom. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we're still running at about $200,000 revenue per person.
Right.
Cool. But as you get more economies of scale, of course, you're going to get more profitability out of that as well, which is awesome. Okay, cool. But some great growth. Lots of changes. Tell us about what you've done differently. Like what are some of the highlight projects that you've done to make the difference?
Well, I think there's a couple things, some basic things and some more complicated things. I mean, basically, we've tried to get more people involved and excited about it. Last year we were able to do a bonus at the end of the year because we hit a revenue number, and people like that. We've been setting some other goals. It's like get reviews and you get $100. So that's getting them sort of be a cheerleader. We've had a couple lunch and learns within the team group to try to get them involved. We're utilizing the PTI Vault a little bit more because there's a lot of great information on that. We didn't really use Wendy as much as we should, and we probably will build upon that going forward, just to kind of keep us on track with some other projects and things. We've some of the bigger things probably were the increase in rates. That first year when you said raise everybody 15%, no way we would have ever done that. Again, it's a basic idea, but we just would never have done that. We would maybe add $10, 2%, 3%, something like that. And then we followed that up this year with the 5% increase, which it really should have been 10, but we'll make that up next year. And then we followed up on more analysis of some of the average hourly revenue numbers. We're still short on those. I mean, I still need to really, and I came back from Edmonds, and there's information on my desk that I want to start going through by client and really looking at things a little harder. But doing the CRAT report, although I'm a little bit behind on submissions, I look at it all the time and I cringe because I look at the guys that you've done work in Atlanta with the other firms and so forth, and I see where they're at, and I say, well, we can get there. It's just a matter of trying to get there, obviously. And then with respect to the book and the niche, I don't think we would have ever picked a niche to actually pursue. But our goals this quarter, before we meet in Toronto, are to do a lot with it and launch it. And Joe and I are pretty much on schedule with that. So we're pretty excited about that. So once that goes, I think the firm really will be changing to in a great way.
All right, got a few questions around that. And just for reference, the PTI Vault is our training library. So we've created a lot of training tools, content, team training, hours and hours and hours of training modules to actually absorb. So that's that thing. You referenced Wendy, just for our listeners and viewers. Wendy is an implementation specialist. And so she works very closely with every firm to make sure the finer details are covered on implementation. And got a question around the 15% price than the 5%. How was that received from the clients when you first did that? You might have been a bit nervous and trepidatious about that, but how was it received from the clients?
I had nobody push back.
So you could have gone higher.
I probably couldn't go higher. Yeah. One guy actually said this year after the 5%, he said, you gave me a pretty big hike last year, and now you hike me again. I think this might be it. But he said it with a smile, and also said, my team is great. So
Yeah.
with that, I mean, we need to go back and because there is room, because the one of the problem that I think is very evident, and I think we knew it before, but we didn't really have a word for it. Is the scope creep. We just sort of always allowed people to kind of say, oh yeah, we'll do that. That's no problem. We'll do that. And now when we added the audit insurance a couple of years ago on the tax returns, we didn't necessarily track it as much as we do now. So, if people don't pay the audit insurance, then they get a notice, and now we're going to, we bill them for it. So the scope creep there is, catch up, and then the scope creep on the other bookkeeping things we're trying to clean up, but it's a little harder, but we are getting there.
So we've done some price changes. What about workflow changes? What have you done there to improve efficiency with workflow?
Joe, what would you say about that? I mean, I think.
Well, we hired a CEC.
Yeah.
We have one person in TOA right now. We've had 3, but we're down to 1. The other 2 didn't work out great, but the one we have now is really good. And for our bookkeeping department. So they were 2 of the things that we did.
I think we have focused more on the workflow. We put our managers, we actually reorganized ourselves. We actually had an account. Before we just sort of said, okay, you're in charge of an account, and people would lend hands and so forth. Now we actually have an accounting manager for the bookkeeping side. And we have a finance manager for our outside CFO and audit side. So, that also helps to direct the firm, where questions go. We pushed a lot of our people onto QBO. So that makes life easier. And any other, billpay.com and those type of things, we've been able to implement that and utilize it more. And just in general, I think besides the workflow, we'll go back to pricing a little bit. Our pricing is a lot more aggressive than it ever was. Joe, we just did an engagement, and we looked at it and we said, how much, and it probably would have been a $4,000 engagement. Now we did it for 10, and they accepted it. We did another one. It was 40,000. We probably would have done that one for 10. So just those little, the courage pills are important. To us that we take, and but we're taking a chance, and people are good with it. Recurring revenue. I kind of go backwards, answering an older question you had, but the recurring revenue we're pushing for. We're getting the credit cards in front, so everything's being billed right in the beginning and collected. So that certainly helps that. So that's been one of the major changes, I think, to our P&L, because the recurring revenue is fantastic.
So Charlie, if you look at revenue growth from 1.8 to probably comfortably 3 this year in a 2-year period, 20% or thereabouts on price increase, so call that 360. We're now at 2.16. The balance of the 900 in the growth, where did that come from? Because it wasn't just on price increase.
Correct. Well, I think client growth. And we've gone out, we've gotten some bigger clients. Our clients have grown. One of the reasons we, going into the franchise, world is because of my background. And we had some franchisees. We picked up a couple other ones that are in the growth mode. Again, recurring revenue of $30,000 to $40,000 a year. So those make a difference. And certainly last year, our growth, a lot of it came from the PPP work and the employee retention, credit work.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that's where we're going to get hurt a little bit this year. We're still grabbing a little bit. Joe and our marketing person, who's an outsourced person, is now launching a email campaign to capture any more ERC type things that some of our clients may have missed, or some of our the group that we just bought for the franchise listing. We're going to promote those as well. Again, a soft sell, introduce the name to them. And perhaps we'll get a couple calls, but that was also probably, what's that equate to, Joe? It's about 150,000 last year. So
yeah, but that was the other thing. We would not have charged as much for the ERC if we didn't hear from the other firms in the group of how much they were charged.
Yeah, we would have easily charged $500 to get somebody 50,000, and instead we charged 5,000.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the power of the networking with the like-minded people, the people.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So tell us about the book. Tell us what the future looks like as far as growth, the focus on franchisees, why that, what's the book about, and what do you hope to achieve from it?
Well, again, through you were successful in writing 4 books, and I used to joke with people that as I own the franchise, yeah, this one after a particular day, this could be chapter 25, because something would happen, and really, there's a lot of things that happen that people aren't aware of. They don't know what life is running a business, and half the thing I say to many of our new clients is that what you get with us is that I've run a business outside a CPA firm. Joe's run a business outside CPA firm. So with that being said, we can offer a lot of expertise because we've done a lot of things that the normal accountant typically hasn't necessarily done. The book is still kind of work in process, because through you I got the contact. That's the other part that's been good. You've given us a lot of contacts for people to assist us. But the franchise book is going to basically talk about what it's like to own a franchise, why, give you numbers, percentages, success rates, stories, just things to really think about in order to be successful in a franchise. And I got to tell you, just the power of that is, somebody called a couple weeks ago, and I was able to say to him, he said, "What do you work with franchise?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I was one, and I do." And you called the right guy because I'm writing a book. And he said, "You're writing a book." So that was pretty good. And even a couple of people when we launched, what's happening in Jebran and Abraham, that was on Charlie's writing a book. All of a sudden, people who would never really talked about the firm to me, at the golf course or outside, said, "Hey, so you're writing a book?" I said, "Yeah, what's it going to be about?" And I got to expand. So it's going to be fun. And if the group that is helping me write it does what they're supposed to do, hey, I'm open for a book tour.
A book tour, love it. Book signing. Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Go. So the focus on the franchisees, your background, you've got a franchise business, Charlie. Is that the primary marketing lead going forward that we're going to target that group? Is that the plan?
It is actually, because just from the franchise list that we got, I mean, we're going to have 25,000 franchisee emails. Don't know how many of those are going to be accurate, but we'll say a good number of them. And there are a number of franchisees. Everything is a franchise these days. You'd like to say that the deli down the street is not one, but chances are it probably is. I was walking in Scottsdale a couple of weeks ago, and there was a sandwich shop that we have down here in Delaware. It's franchised. Primo's, another sandwich shop, it's franchised. Car dealerships are franchised. So everybody has a hand in it. And what's the playbook to make it successful? So we figured we can touch a lot of people, and we want to move out of the so much the orphan 1040s and be more advisory. And if we're more advisory, we can really assist with the knowledge that we have to help them grow, because we know what they should look for. And that,
which leads to another question. You mentioned the client at 40,000 or the franchise groups at 30 or 40,000. What are you doing for your money?
Those are really, it's a combination of just the 1120S's, corporate returns. Pretty much I am on call, I'll say, but we probably have a talk every month for half an hour. Some cases the gentleman is either selling a property, buying another franchise, opening another store, moving things from one thing to another, some tax planning. And then, again, he has one franchise, and all of a sudden, he was able to enter into buying a whole another brand. That's probably going to amount to about 70 stores. He likes me. He likes the firm, likes what we do, and I'm hoping he said a couple times he's going to introduce me to a Taco Bell guy that has about 200. So, again, that's it's because of what we do and the knowledge we have that allow us to enter that network, that world.
Love it. So take this business out 5-10 years, because right now it's been a general business, accounting business, like all sorts of shapes and clients. Mm-hmm. What does it look like in the next 5 or 10 years as far as revenue, client makeup? Because it sounds like it's about to change quite a lot.
Joe, you want to field that one, and I'll tap in.
Yeah, I know it. We want to have the majority of our clients be the franchisees and franchisors, and be selling the advisory services. That's the main thing we want to be selling. If they need the bookkeeping or if they need the tax work, we can do that. But the main thing we want to be able to sell is the advisory, the benchmark reports, the useful information that they'll get on a monthly or quarterly basis that, really let them dig in deep for their numbers.
I mean, what I'd like to see is, right now, again, being a generalist firm and, having done things since 2003, it's sort of the same way. We have a lot of smaller type clients, smaller audits that we do okay with. It fills some time and so forth, but there's some risk to it, and I say that, if the advisory stuff takes off, well, it's not a deliverable, so to speak. We're meeting on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, whatever it may be. We can drop some of those other small price clients. We can really do the ABCD thing and say, okay, we don't need them. We can sell them off. We actually had a partners meeting about a couple weeks ago, and we did talk about our smaller 1040s, trying to get rid of them to try to be more efficient. So I think what we'll end up being is, in the future, we'll be more selective with the clients, be able to replace things that we don't really enjoy with things that we do enjoy, develop the name for ourselves. And, with that, where do we see the revenues? I didn't necessarily think we'd be at 2.5 last year. I never would have guessed that, but we did. Could we be, 4 or 5? I would like to say in 10 years, we're at, $5 or $6 million. Could be higher, but, we may also get to a point where we're just very, like the firm that you showed last week on your Zoom call. I think they're doing 1.9 and putting 1.1 to the bottom line. But not have so many hours worked.
Yeah. There's many ways to mix and match those numbers. Either way, there's a lot of growth going on. It's the right type of growth, which is awesome.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. What other firms, right? So let's say you've got another 2-partner firm, sort of similar size to you. They're wanting to change. Maybe they don't know how to change. What would be your recommendations to them?
Are they with you at that point or before?
No, they're not. They're not.
Okay. I think value what you do, value your knowledge, because I think we as a industry do not value what we know, and as such, we undercharge for everything. And clients who nickel and dime us, we used to always be concerned, like, gosh, all right, I'll waive that fee, I'll lower it, and don't do it. Price yourself at such that you're going to get half the work that you're going to propose for, and therefore you're doing half the work that you would have done had you gotten all the things you did. So be aggressive with your pricing. Put the basics into analysis of the clients, and hire the people, and pay them well to keep them, but give them the authority and the to work on the clients and make decisions and so forth, and train them well.
Joe, what would you recommend to a fresh firm looking at changing?
You need to invest time into working on the business.
Yeah,
that's one thing we've learned, and we still probably don't do it enough, but we certainly now try. We block off time, even during our busiest seasons. We try to block off time working on the business and planning. The other thing is have somebody hold you accountable. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Look, guys, super appreciative of what you've done, what you're doing. We've got a growth path. We've got the foundations have been put in place. We've had a good run the last nearly 2 years, but the next couple of years, I think we're going to see some different style of growth, without the one-off employee retention credits or the PPPs, that they seem to have gone. Now we get into growth from new clients, new services, bigger clients, better pricing, different projects for them. So which is more sustainable growth going forward. And that's where we can really, really grow the revenue and the profitability. Joe and Charlie, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for this. Hopefully, like you were inspired by lots of other stories before you joined up. Others may be inspired by you. Let's hope so, but congratulations on the journey so far. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks very much. Have a good night.